judgment granted to Mr. Mason. Now, it is our belief that his summary judgment should be affirmed for two main reasons. First reason being that by its plain and ordinary meaning, by its clear meaning, the Americans with Disabilities Act covers intermittent explosive disorder. As to the second point, in terminating Mr. Mason from his job, the school district wrongfully discriminated in a way that is unreasonable and without offense. Now, going to the first point, as we look at the ADA, from the statutory intent, by the way it was clearly written, it was meant to be an inclusive statute, meaning that the ADA does not list an exhaustive list of disorders that it covers and protects under its ruling. It offers three main ways that a person may prove to be disabled and worthy of protection underneath the ADA. Now, that is not to say that the ADA does not have its exclusions, but as it stands right now, with the exclusions provided within the ADA in terms of disorders that are not protected by the ADA, IED is not one of them. Now, as to the exclusions that are provided, 5 impulse control disorders are recognized by the DSM-IV. Of those 5 disorders recognized by the DSM-IV, 3 of those impulse control disorders are excluded by the ADA. But it is important to note that within the ADA, IED is not one of those disorders. Of the three excluded, there's kleptomania, pyromania, and compulsive gambling.
When you look at those issues as well as the first paragraph of the exclusions, it's been pretty clear that legislative intent was that they were going to exclude those disabilities or those syndromes or problems that of themselves create harm to others if they're triggered.
It's possible that could have been a consideration in terms of legislative intent when Congress was meeting to discuss the enactment of the ADA. But if you look at those disorders, if you look at kleptomania, for instance, kleptomania, if you steal from someone, automatically it's a crime and automatically you harm someone. Pyromania, as long as it's very likely that if you decide to set fire to something, it's very possible that you already committed the harm. Compulsive gambling, that harms a number of different people, but not only the person himself, but the people the family takes care of. In terms of intermittent explosive disorder, this is just theory. In terms of intermittent explosive disorder, it is possible to be violent, possibly leaving one's own home as a result of IED and not cause harm to anyone else. In terms of the reason it could happen,
Isn't there something could trigger in facts before us? It was a boy's his son's baseball game, and the fact that the coach pulled him. Right?
It was.
And could this express itself as road rage if someone cuts him off somewhere on his way to school?
That's the character of someone with IED, but that's also the character of someone that has IED that has not been treated. As part of his plea agreement, Mr. Mason pled not guilty by reason of insanity and was sent to treatment. After that treatment, he has gone forward with 6 years, as stated by the record, of not harming anyone. And of those 6 years, he spent 1 year working for the school.
It's not plea agreement, it was acquitted by a jury. It was found not guilty by reason of insanity by a jury. It was not a plea agreement.
I believe you're right, Your Honor. That is correct, I apologize. But again, after that, and after he got stopped treatment for his problem, he went through 6 years.
What kind of treatment?
He attended a mental facility by the name of Shadyside Institution.
Okay, so they had him in a mental facility. What kind of treatment? Doesn't the DSM say this? Didn't you tell me that there's no treatment for this?
I don't believe
There's no
that.
medication. Was just his hand.
That was a statement of either Your Honor or possibly my opposing counsel. There should.
Mr. Dyson, to continue this, Judge Hanlon's question with a slightly different twist. Going through the exclusions, pedophilia, exhibitionism, voyeurism, other sexual disorders, compulsive gambling, kleptomania, pyromania, psychoactive substance use disorders resulting from current illegal use of drugs. Now, the common theme I pick out of that statutory language is they are excluding behavior, syndromes, whatever, that expresses itself in manifestations society regarded as criminal. And intermittent explosive disorder sure seems to come within that concept. I mean, look at what Mr. Mason did. He didn't take out a gun and shoot his TV because he was upset at the arrest call. He took a baseball bat or something.
Yeah, he did, and as stated before, he has sought treatment for that. As we look at the specific part of that section, I believe it's section 12113, that's the section later on that mentions that 3 impulse control disorders are excluded from the ADA. If the legislature wanted to exclude something such as IE, or if it wanted to go wide in its focus and say all impulse control disorders should be excluded because these by far almost always result in crime, then I believe the legislature would have done that and would have drafted the ADA to reflect that. It has not. To this date, the ADA still stands as it is, with IE not being included and impulse control disorders as a whole not being excluded. So, as the Supreme Court said in Ford versus Nicholas, we have to discern, the courts have to discern laws as they were clearly intended to be drafted, by the plain and ordinary meaning. And by its plain and ordinary meaning, the ADA as it stands right now still does not exclude IE. Again, the ADA only offers 3 possible ways that a person who proves that a disability is covered by the ADA. That is our argument that the ADA, by its very nature, is intended to be inclusive. It's intended to allow many different individuals.
Are you familiar with the Harper study?
I'm sorry?
Are you familiar with the Harper study?
I am not familiar with that study, no.
Continue.
It is intended to be inclusive by allowing for 3 different ways for a person to argue that his disability is covered by the ADA. Because it doesn't list a list of disorders that it covers, rather it allows people to argue their way into the protection of the ADA. It is meant to be inclusive. Besides that, because intermittent explosive disorder is not excluded by the ADA, and because Mr. Mason can clearly prove that his disability is covered by the ADA, the only possible means that the school district can say that its actions were reasonable is by proving its actions reasonable according to 2 possible affirmative defenses. That being business necessity and direct threat. Both of those defenses revolve around basically the question of whether or not Mr. Mason posed a direct threat to the health and safety of himself or to others. Now, as I've already said in answers to Your Honor's questions towards the beginning, the record shows 6 years after his treatment, where Mr.
I
Mason...
can't let this go. The Harvard study says that the average person who has IED has an average of 43 lifetime attacks. Okay. He's asleep for a third of his life. He's at work for a third of his life, and he's at home for a third of his life.
Yes.
It means that probably not going to have an episode while he's asleep. Half of these attacks are going to happen at work.
Yes.
Maybe 1 or 2 may have happened already in his life. I have no idea.
Well,
but it seems like there's a high probability that they could happen again.
Well, Your Honor, if we read the description of IED from the DSM-4, and taking into account the study, I profess my ignorance of the study. I think I should have been more well prepared in that respect. But as far as the DSM-4 says, it backs you up. It says that IED is likely to recur. However, there is treatment for IED. There is diagnosis for IED. There are ways of recognizing it and realizing how to deal with it and become a functioning member of society. By the 6 years that Mr. Mason, by the record, has not been violent, all we can discern from this particular circumstance is that he has not been violent and has properly handled the problem. Besides that, there is another 9th Circuit case, Joseph versus Pacific Bell, where an individual by the name of Joseph, he actually committed numerous acts of violence, far more than Mr. Mason. Underwent treatment as a result of his criminal trial. Underwent treatment for 10 years all the way up until the time that his court got heard by the 9th Circuit. He had not committed a single incident of violence.
It's actually 16 years.
Even better. But he had not committed a single act of violence. So there are instances of which the court has seen before it where IED has been successfully treated and these people have gone on to meaningful lives and to be safe in the workplace.
But Mr. Mason was an IED syndrome specifically, or was it something else that was his problem?
Joseph's did suffer from IED.
It was an IED?
It was, Your Honor.
You have 1 minute remaining, counsel.
Let me just ask you one quick question. Because assuming that it's covered, do you contend that there was anything else that the school district could have done to accommodate it? And if so, what?
Well, the 2 affirmative defenses, direct threat and business necessity, both look at the idea of reasonable accommodation. Now, arguably, Mr. Mason